for you a server that allows us to create, update, delete data that which is backed in a database by a server, and exposes all these CRUD operations, this create, read, update, and delete operations on a server. And it's using a style of communication between client server that it's called RESTful. These are all RESTful APIs, right? And it's a style of creating application programming interfaces, right, that follow certain conventions. For instance, if a client wants to store some data on a server, it uses the HTTP post verb, right? So in here, the first one, we have a post, right? Also, the URL typically has a specific pattern, right? Usually it starts with some acronym or some well-known prefix. A very common prefix to use is API over here, right? It's using API. Then also the convention says that the URL would end in some plural noun, right, that describes what it is that you're storing, right? So in this case, we're storing users, right? If you want to store actors, then it would be /actors, or movies, or recipes, or whatever it is. Yes, right. So it's a plural noun. And also the data that you want to actually store or create, yes, it would be embedded inside of the body of the HTTP request. Make sense? So that's the convention. That's a RESTful convention, right? I've changed the convention just a slight, which I've put here in between the API and the users. I've added this NUID so that so the server can work with every one of you, individually, so that if you're creating something, I can distinguish that from somebody else creating something. Yes, so that your data, you're working with your own data, and somebody else is working with their own data. Make sense? So this unique identifier, I'm suggesting that you use your NUID, right, so that we can guarantee that it's a unique identifier. But really, you could use anything, yes, that it uniquely identifies you, right? If you want to use your social security number, that's fine, or your phone number, or whatever. Okay, as long as you can guarantee that it's yours, unique, then and as long as you're consistent, you can use whatever will guarantee your uniqueness that identifies you. Yes. Can I just make a statement to not use your social since the URL is not encrypted? It's not encrypted. Yes. Actually, my HTTP is encrypted, I believe. But it's not sent in the body. Yes, this is not sent in the body, but the body will include this as well. Well, I won't know, right, that it's a social. Any 10 digits has no context unless you tell me what it is, right? It could be an account. It could be anything. Whatever you want to put in here that uniquely identifies you, go ahead. Okay, so that's the convention for creating data. Another convention for retrieving data is that you would use the HTTP GET method, right, or verb. And the convention is that if you send a GET request and you either provide the noun all by itself, then the interpretation is that you're asking for all the instances in that particular collection, users. But if you append a unique identifier, right, you will get a particular instance in that collection, right? So this one over here gives you the entire data set, right? So it might be all the users, and each user presumably will have a unique identifier as part of the data. Yes. But if you want an individual instance, you can then provide that ID and perhaps get more information about that particular person. Make sense? All right, so these are for the read operations. This is for the write operation. These two read operations. Then we have, if you want to modify data that already exists in the database, in the API, you would use instead the HTTP put, right? And again, you would put into the particular collection of users, and because you're modifying something that already exists, you need to tell me the primary key of whatever it is that already exists. Which record are you modifying, right? You need to tell me which record, and the actual changes, the modifications. Maybe you're changing the username, maybe you're changing a password, first name, last name, right? That information goes in the body right, of which fields you're changing and the new values. Make sense? Right? Again, that's another convention. And finally, if you're removing a record that already exists in the data set in the server, same thing. You would use the HTTP delete, the same URL, but then the unique identifier of whatever record you are removing. Everybody okay? This is a pretty widely used convention in industry, right? It's a RESTful services. I wrote the RESTful service for you this time around. In a couple of weeks, where you're gonna get a chance to write your own. Right? You'll create your own from scratch. Okay. All right. So having done this, we can try out the actual API by using tools such as Postman. Right? You're familiar with Postman? It's a tool that allows you to interact with these APIs, where you can try out these posts, these puts, deletes, and whatnot. So notice under a webdev here, we have the 5 CRUD operations we just discussed. Right? We have the post, the put, the delete, and 2 gets. Right? So for instance, if I get the I named them find all users, notice it's the get and the URL, right? Which is this URL right here, this with this pattern, right? And if I send the HTTP request, it comes back with an array of a whole bunch of users. And it looks like somebody has been posting things. Alice Craig. Right, don't use my ID. So this is me for Jin Nunzi. Use your NUID or whatever you, or maybe your username, or as long as you can guarantee it's unique. It would retrieve data that you have created. Or if I know the ID of a particular person here, Senthil, I can grab the ID and use the find user by ID and put the ID at the end, send it and get that one request, right? Or I can create new ones. I can post a brand new user to the same URL, but it's a post, and then the body would be encoded as raw text, but formatted using the JSON JavaScript object notation format as a string, formatted that way. And then I can put it here, data, maybe Daniel, or maybe, Frank Herbert. Yeah, that's perfect. I can send Frank, right? And it comes back, the server responds, echoing the same information that I sent, plus a couple of meta information here, including a brand new primary key, because it was inserted into a database, so it tells me what primary key it was inserted with. Also, the NUID that you passed, right? It's also part of the record now, and also the domain users, whether this was you stored it in users or actors or recipes, wherever you stored it, right? Is part of the data that you sent me, right? Is part there. And that allows me to be able to respond for each one of you, right? What information did you store, and what information did you store, right? And get everybody's information right. Anyway, yeah. So let's see how we've interacted with the API manually using this tool, the Postman tool. Instead, we would like to be able to interact with this API programmatically from JavaScript, right? From jQuery. Yes. Let's see how we could do that programmatically, not manually. All right. So let's close Postman, and now let's try and do this programmatically.